I'm Sally Pirie, and I'm a professor of Child and Family Studies here in the College of Education. I'm an anthropologist of childhood and infancy, babies and preschoolers and little kids, and in school and also not in school. And I'm also interested in feminized labor systems. So the women mostly and femmes who are mostly taking care of children at home, at school, at doctor's offices, and other places. And so that's kind of the content of a lot of my work. So I looked at teachers, I've looked at nurses, I've looked at moms, I've looked at people in informal settings and also babies. And I do a lot of work with preschool. And then within that, within childhood, I'm also interested in gender diversity in childhood. So I'm really interested in transgender and other gender diverse children. And I started doing that work in 2015 before we even had a word for it. So I think I have one of the largest samples of transgender children and their families I've been following longitudinally now since 2015. And I do arts-based research. I do comics-based research, which is something that I kind of invented, but so did this guy who's amazing, Marcus Weaver Hightower, who I love you, Marcus, I do. He's out there, he invented it as well. And it's when you take the work of comic art making, which is, it's systematic, right? And you use that in research. So I typically draw and hand letter my research, which is different than most people who do it in like Word in 12-point Times New Roman. Before I was an anthropologist and somebody studying babies and children and teachers in schools, I was a newspaper cartoonist, and I worked for the little school paper at Grinnell College in Iowa, where I went to school, and it got picked up, and I won the Charles Schultz with that strip, which was kind of an exciting moment. But I didn't choose to continue newspaper work. I became a teacher. I wasn't sure what I was doing, and like a lot of people, I chose something that maybe wasn't a great choice for me because that's what my mother had done, and I was afraid to be an artist because I was like, oh my God, what does that mean? Poverty, living in your car, whatever. And then when I went back to do my PhD, my thesis chair, Marquis Lecomte at the University of Colorado Boulder, said, if you have a bifurcated life, where you have like all the art and the fun over here and then like the science over here, you're going to be miserable because there's going to be this chasm, right? And she was completely right. She's like, you need to bring together the art part of your life and the science part. And I did. I started drawing comics, research comics, which was not something. Now there's a lot of comics. There's graphic novels everywhere. Back then there were like two. There was like Persepolis and Mouse, and that was it. And everything else was kind of underground, or it was like Marvel style, like dude comics, right? And so I started drawing, and then somebody I knew, Mitch Allen, who used to be at Altamira and then the Left Coast Press, saw my work, and he's like, oh, nobody can do what you do. You're an academic and a theorist, and you also can draw. And today, a lot of people do comics-based work, but they have to always hire an illustrator most of the time. It's unusual to find someone who does the drawing and also the theory and also the science and all the stuff. So that's where I got where I am. And here in Montague House, where we are right now, I have a comics-based research lab full of people who want to learn to do comics-based research. And I believe everyone can do it, and I believe everyone can draw. So I teach people to draw. I can teach anybody who wants to come learn to draw. I can teach you to draw. I can teach you to bring comics and illustration into your research, regardless of your discipline. So a lot of people are like, oh, it means like you have an illustration. No. There's arts and research, but then there's arts-based research. Comics-based research is a kind of arts-based research. So when we think about arts-based research, which is the doctoral seminar I'm going to be teaching at 4:00 today, arts-based research, we know that research has like a systematic way that it's done. Like sometimes it's a scientific method, sometimes it's other things, but there are steps you follow to make science, right? To make it work. And it's highly systematic and it's regimented and you do it. We also know that when you make art, there are steps that you take to make the art. I'm primarily a cartoonist. I'm also a painter and printmaker. All of those different systems of art making have steps. First you do this, then you do this. And if you mess up the steps, you won't have what you need in the end, right? It's systematic. So when we do arts-based research, we take the systematic steps of art making and we use those to make science. We infuse the steps of science with art. So we use them to gather data, information through the arts, to analyze data, and to disseminate it. And I think most people use it to disseminate because if you have a great, awesome research finding, trying to think from my own research, something that we found that was super, super cool was that even in very, very conservative places in the United States, most transgender children had friends and peers. And it was the adults that were the problem. Like the kids were actually fairly plastic in their thinking about gender and possibility. So let's say I have this amazing finding and I want to get it out. I can write the paper in the journal, and that's fine, and that's great, and that's an important conversation to be having. I can also write a comic or choreograph a dance or do a print or have a show or, do a monologue and put it on YouTube. I can do these things. So it's different ways of dissemination. Comics-based research is that, but the systems we are using, those systematic modes, are the comics tools. So there are specific things you do when you're doing comic art, and we use those to make science. And primarily what I do is the data analysis and the dissemination part. So the kraken over there on the wall is part of a piece that I wrote that's going to be in a book edited by Rebecca Haynes at Salem State, coming out I think soon, about Barbie, and where I had data where I talked to kids about and their moms about playing Barbie and what does that mean, like a feminist moment, and how do we feel about it. But instead of writing a paper, I drew a comic, and I got to draw all these things, like that. I love toys and dolls, and I'm the priestess of fun. I love all this stuff. I love children and childhood and toys and games and pretend. And I also believe that there should be joy in everything that we do, if possible. Even if the baby phone never rings, there's still joy. So the Barbie thing was interesting to me as a researcher, a gender researcher, right? And as a feminist and a parent of children and somebody who had Barbies growing up, and the Barbie film was so evocative and all these things. It was really interesting for me to take that moment and think about this iconic doll and what it means politically. So I had a lot of transgender girls for whom Barbie was this sort of iconic achievement. And I was interested in how they played with Barbie, but more about how they interacted with Barbie media and what they did with it. And their mothers were so afraid that they were going to somehow be polluted by Barbie culture. And this is true of cisgender kids and transgender kids. The mothers are like, oh my God, it's like anti-feminist. How can I let my child have a Barbie? I'm not going to let my child have a Barbie. And then they cave and the child has Barbie. And there's nothing wrong with it. And they aren't, colonized. So Barbie is more about adult fear than anything else, right? All things exist under patriarchy, right? Gender is everywhere and the patriarchal system is everywhere, right? And I find that it's interesting that if we want to be taken seriously doing research with children and babies and teachers and women and femmes, and it's sort of like the marginalized gender scouts, over here. If you want to be taken seriously, you need to do hard data, I hate that, hard science, soft science. It's so gross, right? And I think part of the feminist project and the decolonial project in higher education and in research in the academy is changing that. So I feel like my research is super serious. I have serious stuff to say 24 hours a day, all the time. And I produce it using funny pictures, and I draw. And I have this office full of toys. And by my staking a claim and saying, no, I belong here at the university and I deserve to be taken seriously because I am deliberately soft and squishy and joyful and fun. That is part of the feminist project to me. And by doing so, the more space I take up doing this kind of arty, crazy stuff, I write zines as part of my scholarship. I did it anyway. And I illustrate comic books. I want to believe that when I do that, I'm making more space for people to do other things. When I was in my doctoral program at Colorado, I wanted to do a graphic novel for my dissertation. And they said no, because no one had ever done it before. Right? I've done it now, so other people can do it. And people are doing that. But beyond sort of taking up space with something soft and squishy and kind of joyful and happy and funny with dolls and toys and silliness, by doing that, it creates cracks in that fetishization we have for hard data and science of this and blah, blah, white coats and, patriarchal sort of masculinization of the knowledge economy, such that people doing all kinds of different things, people who look different, right? People whose families are not in higher ed, people of color who are still hugely underrepresented in the academy, people with linguistic diversity, cognitive differences, all those kinds of things. We can do that sort of stuff. I think there's a lot of reasons why people don't trust the arts. The arts are inherently subversive. And the arts, at their most basic form, I believe they serve the marginalized. And that's why a lot of sort of fine art has been taken off to like the land of like dudes. I think about dance, right? I used to be a dancer. I used to dance. I don't anymore really. But I remember memorizing all the ballet forms and like my feet in first position, second position, plie, jeté, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, where did we get these forms? And nobody knew. They'd just been handed down to us from some dude, some Russian dude who's like, here you go, learn these things if you want to be a real dancer, because this is what I say real dancing is. And I was curious about why we didn't get our forms from our lives. Like, why do I not have a dance form that's my grandmother chopping onions? Why do I not have that form? I should have that form, right? So when we talk about fine art and folk art, and I'm a cartoonist. Like, it's the lowest rung on the ladder. They're just like, oh yeah, you draw funny pictures, right? You representationalism. Okay, fine, I do. I do not have an art degree. I have never had art training. This is just what I can do. I think that art is subversive at its most basic. I think it serves the marginalized. I think there was a belief that anyone can do it. Right? So part of the academy is gatekeeping to keep out the women and the people of color and the people who use English as a second language and the queers and the disabled, right? It's about keeping people out by making it seem hard. And art, anybody can do it. Doesn't mean they can do it well. And it takes dedication, it takes craft, and you do have to really sweat. It's not natural talent most of the time. You have to really, really sweat. But I think that's why. And it's not about dumbing it down either. People are like, oh, you're a comic artist. Oh, you wrote all these thousands of books and blah, blah. Are you dumbing it down? I'm not. You can make something very complex clear without making it simple. And that's what arts-based research does. It makes something very, very complex more clear without simplifying or dumbing it down. And that's what's hard. I think arts-based research speaks to the complexity and the viscerality of science and what we do. I think it opens up new avenues for understanding. I think that at our most basic, human beings understand things through a process of metaphor. And I think that the arts give us those metaphors. They give us those tools. The way I teach comics-based research and the way I teach it in a lab here at UMass is that I use it primarily as a data analysis tool. And people are like, what does that mean? But what it is when I'm reading through transcripts of, because in social science, we have our interview transcripts and our field notes and all the sort of texty stuff. So I read through it and I reflect on my time in the field, or I reflect on what I'm doing, or I think about the participant, and I'm drawing. I'm drawing while I'm doing that. And what are the images? What are the forms? Where do they come from? And one thing that I drew very, very early, so 2017, right after the dreadful election, I was in the field and I had seen some horrible things. And I was drawing this sort of mouth with all these teeth because it was a terrible moment. While I was doing the data analysis, I was drawing this over and over. I couldn't get this image out of my head. And at first I thought, oh, I'm drawing this because this is scary data about these horrible things happening to trans people in the United States when Trump won. Like overnight, it was bad. But the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about those images and drew them over and over again and started kind of making a little comic story, I figured out that it wasn't because it was scary that I was drawing it. It's because it was about bravery. And that's a radical shift, right? And I don't know that I would have gotten to that place just from reading the transcripts and memoing. I think I had to go to that art place. And when you make art, you go to a place. And people say, oh, and this is another piece about sort of masculinization of the knowledge economy. People talk about objectivity and subjectivity like it's something we can have. And arts-based research says, you need to control your subjectivity so you're not just advancing things that are not based in the science, but you can use it as a tool. So that feeling that you have when you're like just something isn't right in the field and you feel sick and it's painful and awful, conventional science says put that feeling away, lock it in a box, and focus on the data. Speak to the data. We don't do that. We say, okay, take that feeling, put it over here, and then soak in it. What is it telling you? Where is it telling you to look? You know, the human being and the heart and the mind of a human being is our finest and most important instrument in social science, and in a lot of other places too. But the art is where we go to that feeling and use that as a lever for understanding the human condition more clearly and then communicating it. Just today, my daughter Betsy, who is 13, she sent me a picture of Barbara Kruger's Your Body is a Battlefield. And she's like, Mommy, what does this mean? I want to get this on a t-shirt, but I want to know what it means. And I was like, oh, child, call me. She was horrified because she had never had it spelled out for her. I mean, she listens to me talk all the time, but doesn't listen, you know. Horrified, spelled out to her the extent to which we are not people. Corporations are people, but women, including trans women, because trans women are women, and femmes, and all the kind of gender marginalized scouts, as I call them, we're not people legally, and that's a problem. It's a huge problem. So I think, yeah, Women's History Month is hugely important. Anything we can do to be like, wait a minute, we constitute more than half the population and we still don't have basic rights over what to do with our bodies. It's astonishing. If you're not enraged, you're not paying attention. So I think Women's History Month is huge. And I think women in the arts is particularly important because, you know, at the end of the day, the gatekeeping is still present that puts women's and femmes, you know, I don't want to be trans-inclusionary or non-binary people as well, that puts the things that those people create in folk, right? And then everything else is fine because it's a dude. And I find that anathema, right? And in comics especially, oh my God, to be a woman in comics, it's less bad than it used to be. But it used to be just, you know, you draw something and then you'd sit next to somebody at a convention who was just drawing Marvel characters with huge boobs, and that was it. It was so objectifying and so awful. And increasingly now we're getting more diversity in terms of who's authoring comics and who's drawing them and the kinds of bodies that are presented, especially non-binary and trans bodies in comics. But, you know, it's an emergency. I don't know if I'm getting this across. I believe Women's History Month is hugely important because I think young people, like my daughter, don't understand that it is worse now than it was when Women's History Month started. I mean, it's hugely important. I mean, the impulse to exclude all the TERFs out there, I got no time for that. No time. But all those folks, the sort of second wave white feminists who want to exclude Black feminisms, all that stuff, it's just patriarchy. You know, you think about women who choose to affiliate with, you know, with sort of hegemonic masculinities because they think it'll keep them safe somehow. The women who like voted for Donald Trump, they did the same kind of thing. But that just is divide and conquer. So when people get through their head that, you know, that is not helping us, you know, the more the mightier, it's not taking anything away from you, cisgender women, to include, you know, all of your trans and non-binary and other people under the big tent. Because we have got more than enough problems and fight for ourselves. And frankly, the problem is patriarchy. The patriarchy, it hurts men, it hurts women, it hurts everyone. You know, I do work in feminized labor systems, right? We're right here next to the College of Education. This is a feminized space. It's a whole ton of women over there. Women, non-binary people, mostly women, historically and otherwise, because women, elementary school teachers and early childhood teachers are women. So if you look at salaries at UMass and you look where the lowest salaries are, they're over here because it's education, and education is full of women. I bet it's only marginally better in nursing. But if I had an appointment in any other department, my salary would be higher because of the presence of women. So yeah, it is an emergency. And, you know, our transgender sisters, our non-binary allies, they aren't here to take from women. They're here to help us. And I think, you know, it's high time to quit. The TERFs can just go away. I don't have time for that. And it's part of our history. It's part of our history, right? The right of gender self-determination is a basic human right, and it should not be denied to anybody. It's going to get better. Your generation is going to make it better. I see the young people in my classes here, my undergraduates, and I'm just enraptured. Yeah. Because they are fantastic human beings. if there wasn't a million reasons to stay here at UMass, the undergraduates would be the reason. I use art to teach because it's funny. I teach with all my students start with a drawing prompt every day in class to like center them and get them focused. So yeah, I use art in that way, but primarily, and then I teach art. I mean, I teach the classes. I teach the studio art classes. I teach about, here's how you teach art to children, but also here's how you become an artist yourself, because that's also important. And a lot of the students in that class have never had access to high quality art instruction. It's sometimes the first time any of them have been taught how to do these different things. And I think by giving them that opportunity, that's a gift that will then make them better teachers of anything, because they will have that luxury of being able to express themselves properly. So I do teach that as a form of teaching. But primarily most of what I do with art is my research, and then my shtick as an illustrator. I mean, I write textbooks. I have so many of these. These are just the two best ones. I've written two. I've got another one that I'm writing with a colleague right now. These are the Shane the Lone Ethnographer ethnographic series. They're all illustrated. They're all hand lettered, the whole thing. Always illustration has been my niche. Always, always. During the pandemic, I got more into some other forms. Like I learned I've always been a painter as well, but I have never been very good at it. But I got very interested in painting and developed some technique there. I do a lot of printmaking, woodcut and linoleum cut printmaking. I think there's a level of abstraction in our lives anyway, but during the pandemic, things became, to borrow from Tony Giddens, phantasmagoric, right? Because everything was online, and we just, like, nothing was real. Everything was, so I felt the need, instead of just drawing something two-dimensional, I wanted to make something physical. Mm-hmm. So I started doing a lot of woodcut and lino cut, because you're physically making, like, digging a thing. And so I've done a lot of that, and I take courses in that here locally, because I like I have a little baby press over there, but I'd like to use the big table press for that. So I do that. And then I also make a lot of toys. My father is a master woodworker, and I'm a little afraid of saws because I need my hands to draw, but I do make toys out of recycled trash, and I make them out of little wooden parts, and I sew and make little stuffed creatures as a form of art. So yeah, just making a thing is the antidote to the excessive abstraction of our era. But illustration is, I'm a professional illustrator. I'm not a professional toy maker or weird costume maker or performance artist. This is the name game. I wrote this when I changed my name. Because I wanted to research human names and naming traditions. And I realized that coverture is a thing, which I didn't understand what that was. It says all because of the utterly fucked up concept of coverture. No, seriously, it is insane and yet totally on brand for patriarchy. It is historically all about a woman's legal status. Quote, a legal formation that held that no female person has a legal identity. A female baby was covered by her father's identity, and then when she was married by her husband's, she becomes, and this is the phrase, legally dead. So it's not that women take the last names of their husbands, which is how we think of it. It's that they become part of the husband's body. She does not exist in the law. Only the husband does. And that's from Catherine Algor, who wrote a piece called Coverture, the word you probably don't know, but should. And so I changed my name because I got very, very tired of hauling around some dude's name. And so I wrote this little zine and I put it up on my website, and people were crazy for it. And so I printed out hard copies and I've mailed them everywhere. And, like I have a little guy here, he says, this freaked out when people got gay married, because he's like, who is the man? How can there be a marriage if nobody is property? While academic women are discriminated against for every reason under the sun, motherhood, existing, etc., the name game is a classic example of how they cannot win. Academic women who kept their names were seen as less likable, but those who took their partner's name were less likely to be hired, and even if they got the job, had much lower salaries. And I have 2 citations for that, and it gets worse. Name changes are uniquely visible in an academic career because of the centrality of the publication record. People who thought that women academics who changed their names at marriage exhibited higher levels of competence and commitment as, quote, behaviors that are consistent with gendered expectations are evaluated more favorably, end quote. Female academics who changed their surname are rewarded for complying with prescriptive gender stereotypes and for fitting into the expected role as the caretaker. But Perceptions are not citations. And if I change my name, I'm lost to science. The citations my career depends on are affected. While taking my husband's name makes academics colleagues value me for meeting creepy gender expectations, that will probably hurt my career in the long run. Any change in my name damages my record, but I did it anyway. It's everywhere. People are like, why are you so, I'm like an angry middle-aged woman. But if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I think about like the rage that I feel over like the structural effects of what I have been exposed to. And not just, it's not like, expose level, oh my God, this horrible thing happened. It's a larger structural system of microaggressions that affect everything that you do, right? The pay stuff sends me over the edge. It really does. Because if I was a man, I'd be making a lot more money. And that's just, and there's all kinds of structural things in place about like, so-and-so is in an area that there's more grants available in. It's also an area where there's more men. And so it's more valued. And so there's money. So they get more. So it's not that somebody's saying, oh, look, a man pay him more. It's much more structural than that. And it's affected. So I think about the rage that I feel. And then I imagine that it is this big compared to the rage that people of color feel on the daily, right? So I have to bracket that and be like, yeah, I'm furious, but I just want to imagine what that's like because it sends me into paroxysms. And the one gift of getting older and becoming a senior faculty member is that, I can go ahead and be ugly about it. I think the niceness, obedience, compliance, and conformity that are expected from young women, especially junior faculty in a lot of places, are stultifying and horrible. I know because I had to play the game and it was gross. If we had access to better healthcare and childcare, it would be a lot better for women and for a lot of other people too. It's kind of like universal design for learning. So when you talk about teaching and learning in schools, we talk about how the accommodations that you make for a child with a learning disability or an adult or anybody with a learning disability in your classroom where you teach, it's not going to just help that child. It's going to help 100 other people, right? So I wear a microphone when I teach because I have a student who is hard of hearing and I talk really fast. But that helps everyone. It helps me because I don't have to shout. If I'm in a building and I put in a ramp so a wheelchair user can get in the building, everyone can use the ramp, right? It benefits everyone. The things that we put in place to help women benefit everyone. It benefits everyone. So I think that we do need to put those things in place to make it more equitable. I think that, capitalism is to blame. I think patriarchy is to blame. I think working the way we work is to blame. If somebody asks you how you're doing, your answer is supposed to be, oh my God, I'm so stressed. I'm so tired. I'm dying. I'm sick. I'm going to work 20 more hours tonight when I go home. But the idea is that it's okay to be happy. It doesn't mean you're not a good worker, right? So part of my revolution and part of my feminism and part of my anti-racism and part of my flagrant communism, yes, just paint this off as red right now, is affirming there should be joy in the work. You should be enjoying yourselves. It's okay for things to be cute and fun. That's fine. It doesn't make you less of a person, right? You are worth more than your productivity. So I think that transforming those things goes a long way towards all the different kinds of equity that we're talking about. Because it destabilizes that hyperproductivity narrative that underpins patriarchy and so many other things. So for National Women's History Month, we should be like, let's all take a nap right now. Because tired people can't make decisions to protect themselves, but rested ones can.